She is standing at the head of a boardroom table. The mahogany beneath her hands is so dark, it looks like dried blood. The windows behind her, 3 stories of glass, frame the entire New York skyline like she commissioned it, like she had it built there. 40 men in expensive suits sit in front of her. CFOs, chairmen, men who have eaten smaller companies for breakfast their entire careers, and every single one of them is leaning forward, just slightly, like flowers turning toward a light source. They don't know they're doing it. She built this over a lifetime, not with aggression, not with threats, not with the blunt, visible force that men in that room would have used, with something quieter and far more dangerous. She built it with love. Yours, theirs, everyone's. And not one person in that room, not one person in her entire life, ever saw it coming. This is the story of Alexandra Blackwell, the good twin, the golden one, the granddaughter who saved the family, the woman who inherited the empire, the one everybody loved. At least, that's what she wanted you to think. Maine, 1982. Kate Blackwell is turning 90, and the whole world has turned up to watch. The house, 3 stories of white Georgian colonial, every window blazing gold, sits on the Maine coastline like something that was always meant to be there, like the land grew around it. Inside, crystal chandeliers throw hard, warm light across a ballroom full of people in black tie. The kind of light that flatters no one and reveals everything. Governors toast her. A Supreme Court justice raises a glass. The President of the United States sends a telegram. It gets a standing ovation. Kate sits through it the way she sits through everything, perfectly still, perfectly composed, watching. A slim woman in ivory velvet, white hair, a face that has seen a century and chosen to remember all of it. She is, without question, the most powerful person in this room. She has been the most powerful person in every room she has ever entered. She built an empire with her bare hands, outlasted 4 presidents, and buried every enemy who ever underestimated her. Above the fireplace, dominating the far wall, her father looks down at the room. Jamie McGregor, oil on canvas, 2 meters tall, young in the painting, but the eyes are ancient. The eyes of a man already in possession of things not yet taken. Nobody at the party looks at it. It looks at them. And then, the room goes quiet. Because a boy sits down at the Steinway, 8 years old, black velvet jacket, feet that don't quite reach the pedals. He plays Scriabin, and the room, mid-sentence, mid-sip, mid-breath, simply stops. That's Robert, Kate's great-grandson, the future of the Blackwell line. Or so everyone believes. And then there's the woman standing near the fireplace, still, composed, a smile on her face that belongs in a cathedral, eyes the color of deep water in winter, watching Robert play with an expression of such genuine, radiant warmth that 3 separate guests will later describe the moment to their spouses. "You should have seen the way she looked at him," they'll say. "She was extraordinary." That's Alexandra, Kate's favorite, the golden granddaughter, the good one, the one everybody loves. Hold that feeling while I tell you how it all began. To understand Alexandra, you have to understand where she came from. And where she came from started not with her, not even with Kate, but with a broke Scottish kid standing in the South African dust. With 37 pounds, a bad temper, and a single raw diamond in his cracked and bleeding hand. The Kimberley diamond fields in the 1880s were not romantic. The sky was a white so bright it had burned past blue into something close to threat. The earth was red laterite, cracked by heat into 1,000 broken polygons, dusted with the iron smell of money being dragged out of the ground by men who had nothing left to lose. In the middle of it all, the big hole. An open-cast mine so vast it had its own weather. You could stand at the rim and see the curvature of the earth in miniature. Men moved along the edges like ants, taking apart something too large to comprehend. And somewhere among them, squinting into the glare, hands already cracked and raw, 37 pounds lighter than when he arrived, was Jamie McGregor. He'd been cheated out of his claim on day one, lost everything, stood in the dust with empty pockets and a fury that needed somewhere to go, and decided, right there, in that heat, in that iron-smelling air, that the world owed him. So he'd take it. And he did. He clawed. He schemed. He lied when lying was cheaper and told the truth when truth was the better weapon. He manipulated, maneuvered, absorbed, and consumed until a tent became a building became a company, and a company became Kruger Brent Limited, chiseled in stone, permanent, his. He had one child worth keeping, Kate, and Kate got everything: the brilliance, the nerve, the refusal to lose. But she also got the blind spot, the one that runs in this bloodline like a fault line through rock. Jamie never saw the predator that looked like family. Kate Blackwell never saw it either, and it would cost her everything. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Kate had a son, Tony. Tony was gentle and artistic and entirely the wrong man for the throne she'd built. He married, he had daughters, twins, 2 little girls in identical white dresses playing in the garden at Cedar Hill House in the summer light, holding hands, angelic, symmetrical. Every adult who saw them used the same word, enchanting. Eve and Alexandra. One of them was the villain of this story. Everybody knew which one. Eve made sure of that. She was loud about it, cruel in the open, the kind of cruelty that announces itself, breaks the doll deliberately, watches it shatter, smiles at the pieces. The kind of villain who saves everyone else the trouble of guessing. Useful, as it turned out, for her sister. Because while Eve burned and raged and broke things, Alexandra did something far more interesting. She watched. A schoolroom, age 7. The other children looking at the teacher, Alexandra looking at the room. Not the lesson, the reactions. Who laughed at what? Who needed to feel seen? Who needed to feel superior? Who was lonely? Who was afraid? Filing it, every piece. And when Eve would shatter something, a relationship, a porcelain doll, a family dinner, Alexandra was already on her knees, gathering the pieces, her hand moving in slow, gentle circles on her sister's back. Her face toward Eve, soft with concern. Her face turned fractionally away from the room. Nothing. Not cold, not cruel, just a screen turned off. The blankness of a mind already working out the next move. She was 7 years old, and she was already the most dangerous person in this story. Eve wanted to be feared. Alexandra made a different calculation. She decided that love, manufactured, engineered, perfectly timed love, was the only weapon worth carrying through life, and she started practicing. Age 7, she never stopped. But practice needs a target, and no target in Alexandra's world was more valuable or more vulnerable than the woman who had built everything, Kate Blackwell, who was brilliant, who was powerful, who had survived a century of enemies, and who was, underneath all of it, desperately, profoundly lonely. Alexandra saw that from across a room when she was 16 and walked straight toward it, with a tea tray and a question and eyes that made you feel like the most important person alive. Kate's private study at Cedar Hill House was the kind of room that told you everything about the woman who used it. Dark mahogany walls lined floor to ceiling with the working documents of a dynasty. A desk the size of a small country. The faint smell of pipe tobacco from a habit Kate had given up 40 years ago, and the room had never quite forgotten. Every object in it was functional, even the painting on the far wall. A map of the original Kruger-Brent claim, hand-drawn, framed in plain oak, was not decoration. It was a reminder. Kate was at her desk when Alexandra knocked, 16 years old, a tea tray, unprompted, arriving at exactly the moment Kate had been sitting alone long enough to feel it. Watch this. This is where it starts in earnest. Alexandra sets down the tray. She doesn't ask if Kate wants company. She doesn't hover. She simply sits, folds her hands in her lap, and says, "Tell me about Kruger-Brent." Quiet, genuine, curious in the way that makes your chest expand. "Tell me about what you built." And Kate Blackwell, who had been guarded against boardrooms and courtrooms and competitors for 60 years, felt her shoulders drop and began to talk. Here's what you need to understand about powerful, lonely people. Give them your full, undivided, hungry attention, and they will give you everything. Not immediately, not obviously, but eventually, everything. Kate talked for an hour that first evening, about the early years, about the fights she'd had to pick and the ones she'd let go, about David, about what it cost to build something that was supposed to outlast you. And Alexandra listened the way a musician listens to a piece they intend to perform, not to enjoy it, to absorb it, to own it. She came back the following week, and the week after. Tea, questions, that expression of total absorption. Never once glancing at her watch, never once steering the conversation toward herself. Eve, meanwhile, was somewhere in the house breaking things. And every time Eve broke something, Alexandra appeared in the aftermath. Quiet, steady, hand on Kate's shoulder, voice low. "She doesn't mean it, Gran. You know how she is. You know she loves you." Always defending her sister, never speaking against her, which, and this is the important part, made Kate trust her more. Because only a truly good person defends someone who treats them badly, isn't it? Kate certainly thought so. That was the point. What Kate never saw, because she was never meant to see it, was Alexandra leaving the study, the door closing behind her, the corridor empty, and the warmth on Alexandra's face switching off, like a light thrown in a dark room. Already planning the next visit, already calculating the compound interest on a decade of perfectly placed kindnesses. She was 16. She had the patience of something geological. Every great performance needs more than a willing audience. It needs contrast. It needs a darkness next to it so the light looks brighter. Alexandra had that covered. She always had. Her sister had been providing that contrast since they were children. But now, as adults, Alexandra needed Eve to do something more specific. She needed her occupied, discredited, and pointed at exactly the right target. Enter George Mellis. Who thought he was the predator in this story? Who had absolutely no idea he was the bait? Eve Blackwell at full tilt was genuinely something to witness. She moved through rooms like weather, loud, spectacular, leaving damage you'd be finding for weeks. She had Kate's iron will and none of her discipline, her father's sensitivity and none of its gentleness. She was the kind of person who made everyone in the room acutely aware of where the exits were, and she burned through relationships with Kate, with the company, with anyone who tried to manage her, like a fire that doesn't know it needs fuel to keep going. Which meant that every time Eve detonated a family dinner or reduced Kate to exhausted silence with another screaming confrontation in the drawing room, and she did this regularly, enthusiastically, almost artistically, Alexandra appeared. Soft footsteps in the corridor, a hand on Kate's shoulder, the same voice, the same words. She doesn't mean it. She loves you. She just doesn't know how to show it. Kate would breathe, pull herself together, and look at Alexandra with an expression that was, if you knew what to look for, the expression of someone handing over a key. Eve saw it. Eve had always seen it. But Eve fought with her hands and her voice and her fury. She had never understood that her sister fought differently. That every explosion Eve caused was a brushstroke in a portrait Alexandra was painting. The portrait of herself as the good one, the reliable one, the one who deserved the throne. In a private moment, no audience, just the two of them, Alexandra said to her sister, very quietly, with no heat in it at all, "You're making it too easy for me." Eve went still, because Eve had terrorized everyone in this family her entire life. And this was the first time she'd looked across a room and felt something shift, something cautious, something that was not quite fear, but was its neighbor. She didn't say anything. Alexandra was already moving on. She had a party to attend, a very specific introduction to make. His name was George Mellis. Tall, aristocratic in the old European way, the kind of wealth that goes back far enough to forget where it came from. A face built for trust, eyes built for something else entirely. He was exactly the kind of man Eve would chase, exactly the kind who would consume her, exactly the kind who would accelerate her undoing. And Alexandra walked her sister across the room, hand on Eve's arm, warm and sisterly, and said, "Eve, you simply must meet George," and smiled the whole time. Eve didn't find George Mellis. She was delivered to him, gift-wrapped, by her sister, who then excused herself from the conversation and didn't look back once. The most dangerous introductions in history were never made at gunpoint. They were made with a smile, at a party, by someone you trusted completely. With Eve occupied and burning herself down, Alexandra had the space she needed. She found Peter Templeton, psychiatrist, decent to the marrow, the best man she had ever met, and she fell for him. In her way, which is, and I will keep saying this, the most frightening sentence in this story. Because loving Peter Templeton was not separate from needing him. It never occurred to her that it should be. The cathedral they married in was the kind of place that made you feel, regardless of your beliefs, that something larger than yourself was present. Late afternoon light through stained glass, breaking across white marble in pools of amber and rose. White flowers, peonies and white roses, hundreds of them, cascading from every surface until the air itself felt thick with sweetness. And at the far end of the aisle, Peter Templeton, tall, open-faced, the kind of man you trust on sight. The kind of man who, when he looks at someone, makes that person feel entirely seen, entirely known, entirely safe. He was, by every measure, exactly what Alexandra needed him to be, which is why she chose him. But here's the thing, and I want you to sit with this. She did love him, in her way. She loved him the way a mathematician loves an elegant proof, with admiration, with something close to joy, with genuine feeling that is nonetheless inseparable from utility. Peter was the man who would love her unconditionally, which made him the man who would never examine her clearly, which made him the perfect husband. The priest spoke, the vows were exchanged. Alexandra's voice, steady and soft and true, not shaking, not performing, present. In the front pew, Kate, pearls, her hand pressed to her chest, the first time anyone in the family had seen her cry in 30 years. And the guests, watching Alexandra take Peter's hands, they felt it. That pull, that warmth, that sense of witnessing something real. Because what you feel right now, listening to this, that's exactly what Alexandra engineered. She spent her entire life learning how to make a room feel exactly this. The music, the light, the quality of her attention, all of it precise, all of it deployed, all of it perfect. And underneath it, vast and still and cold as the Atlantic outside Cedar Hill House, the satisfaction of a plan arriving exactly on schedule at its next stage. The marriage of Alexandra Blackwell to a respected psychiatrist was not reckless. It was the opposite of reckless. Think about it. Of all the professions in the world, who would you least want examining your wife? A psychiatrist. She married one. Voluntarily. Enthusiastically. That's not confidence. That's a different order of intelligence entirely. She did love him, in her way. Keep telling yourself that. We'll come back to it. Everything was in place. Kate secured. Peter devoted. Eve discredited and descending. There was only one loose piece. One person in Alexandra's orbit who had spent enough of his life in darkness to recognize it in someone else. George Mellis, who had been watching Alexandra very carefully for a very long time, and had seen something that nobody else had or was willing to. The problem with putting a predator in your sister's path is that predators have excellent radar for each other. George Mellis was, by any objective measure, a terrible person. Vain, predatory, dangerous in enclosed spaces. The kind of man who charm offensive his way into rooms he had no right to occupy and left damage that took years to surface. But dangerous people have very good radar for each other. He'd been watching Alexandra at family dinners for months. Not the way men usually watched her, with that pulled forward attention, that eagerness to be near the warmth. Different. The way you watch something when you're trying to catch it doing something it doesn't want caught. He noticed the timing of her kindnesses, how they always arrived at exactly the right moment, how she always knew, somehow, when to appear and when to disappear. How the warmth, if you looked at it from slightly the wrong angle, had the structure of a machine. He watched her for 3 months, dinner by dinner, event by event. And then he asked to speak with her privately. "You're very good," he said. No preamble, cigarette lit, leaning back like a man with nothing to lose. Better than Eve, better than Kate. I almost didn't see it. And Alexandra, who had not had an uncontrolled reaction in front of another person since she was approximately 5 years old, produced the smallest smile. Not the cathedral smile, not the boardroom smile, something realer than either. The smile of someone who has been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, to be seen. "Almost," she said. He blew a long, slow stream of smoke toward the ceiling, looked at her. "So, what are you going to do about me?" She picked up her glass, took one sip, set it down precisely, looked at him with the full warmth of the cathedral smile and said, "George, I think you should come and see my husband, professionally. I'm very worried about you." He stared at her, and something crossed his face that George Mellis had not felt in a very long time. Not fear, worse. Recognition. The recognition of watching someone operate at a level you can see but cannot reach. He'd set himself up to blackmail her. She'd turned it into a referral before he finished his cigarette. George Mellis had survived his entire life by reading dangerous people. He read Alexandra perfectly. He named her, saw her, and it made absolutely no difference because she had already made her next move 3 weeks ago. The move that turned the best man she'd ever met into the most effective weapon she'd ever deployed. Without him knowing. Without him ever knowing. Rewind, 14 days before that conversation. Alexandra sat down with Peter in the living room of their Manhattan apartment. The room was warm, the light was low, and she was, and this is the word people use for her always, trembling. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and they were, very slightly, unsteady. It was masterful. "I'm worried about George," she said, voice just above a whisper. "He's been watching me, saying things. I didn't want to say anything because I know how much you like him, but Peter, I'm frightened." She looked up, and the expression on her face was so precisely calibrated, not dramatic, not hysteria, just the quiet, reluctant fear of a woman who has waited too long to say something she needed to say, that Peter Templeton, a man professionally trained to read emotional states, believed every word. He pulled her close, said all the right things, and filed what she'd told him in the part of his mind where clinical assessment lives, where it would stay, waiting. 2 weeks later, George Mellis walked into Peter's office voluntarily. He had decided to go on the record. He laid it out methodically. Dates, patterns, observations, the way an intelligent man presents a case he spent months assembling. The timing of Alexandra's kindnesses, the precision of her emotional responses, the structure beneath the warmth of something too controlled to be natural. He had thought it through. He had evidence. He put all of it on Peter Templeton's desk. Peter listened. He nodded. He maintained the composed, neutral expression of a professional, and behind it, he was not believing a word. How could he? His wife had come to him 2 weeks ago, trembling. His wife, the warmest person he had ever known. The woman whose capacity for love had changed his understanding of what people were capable of. This man, sitting across from him, claiming she was a performance. Peter stood, straightened his jacket. "I think you should know, Mr. Mellis, that my wife came to me some time ago. She's been concerned about your behavior. Quite distressed, actually. I think what you're experiencing might benefit from professional support. I can give you a referral." George didn't move. He looked at Peter, long. And then he stood, picked up his hat, and walked out. Down the corridor, through the lobby, into the Manhattan street. He stood on the pavement in the November cold and looked up at the building. One lit window, Peter's office. The silhouette of a man at a desk. A good man. A brilliant man. Utterly, completely, permanently hers. George Mellis had survived his whole life by being the most dangerous person in the room. He understood, standing on that pavement, that he had never been in a room with anyone like Alexandra Blackwell, and that there was nothing left for him to do. She didn't threaten him. She didn't bribe him. She used the most devastating weapon available: a good man who loved her. And Peter Templeton never knew. Not once, not ever. That was the point. That was always the point. With George neutralized, not silenced, not threatened, just clinically, lovingly made irrelevant, Alexandra had cleared the last obstacle. There was nothing between her and the thing she had been moving toward since she was 16 years old. Sitting in her grandmother's study, asking questions with those wide, warm, winter water eyes. The empire, and the woman who built it, who was by now 90 years old and ready to let go, which is the most dangerous thing a powerful person can do when the wrong hands are waiting. The fire was burning low, Kate's private study. The same room with the dark mahogany walls and the oak-framed map of the original Kruger-Brent claim was quieter than it used to be. The dynasty documents spread across the desk were thinner now, the decisions fewer. The attorney seated beside Kate was the fourth generation of his family to work for Kruger-Brent, and the pen Kate lifted was the same one she had used to sign every major document of her life. She was signing a new will, leaving the bulk of her estate and control of Kruger-Brent Limited to Alexandra. Alexandra sat across the desk, hands folded, the stillness of deep water on a windless day. This moment had taken decades to arrive. She had been patient every minute of it. Kate set down the pen, looked up, across the desk, at the woman she loved most in the world, and she reached out, took Alexandra's hand. Her grip, even at 90, still strong. The worn diamond on her finger, the very stone her father had scooped from South African earth a century before, catching the firelight. "You're everything I built this for," she said, her voice raw, true, every syllable of it. And Alexandra's eyes filled. Right on time, right on cue, precise as a sunrise. Now, I want to stop here, because this moment matters in a way the others don't. These tears may be real, in Alexandra's internal architecture, whatever that looks like. Kate Blackwell may be the closest thing to genuine feeling she has ever allowed herself. A version of love that arrived exactly when it served her, but arrived. Kate squeezed her hand, and in that moment, she was the happiest she had been since David died. Deceived, completely, lovingly, and perhaps, just perhaps, loved, after a fashion, for whatever that was worth. Jamie McGregor stood in the South African dust, with cracked hands and 37 pounds, and decided the world owed him. His great-great-granddaughter sat in a leather chair in a Maine estate with folded hands and a composed expression, and decided the same thing. She was just considerably better at hiding it. The Empire, signed over in ink, in tears, in tenderness, the cleanest coup in the history of the Blackwell dynasty, and not a single law broken, not one. Kate Blackwell died 2 years later, in her own bed, in her own house, surrounded by the people she loved. She died believing she had chosen wisely, that the right hands would carry the flame. She was not wrong. She was only wrong about what the flame was for. The boardroom was the same mahogany table, same floor-to-ceiling windows, same New York skyline, indifferent and vast. Everything the same, except the name on the chair at the head of the table. Alexandra Templeton, Chief Executive Officer, Kruger Brent Limited. 140 years of empire, all of it now hers. She did not run it the way Kate ran it. Kate had ruled with visible iron. You always knew where the power was. Alexandra ran it with consensus, warmth, the appearance of collaboration. Every board member left every meeting convinced the strategy had been collectively formed, that their contribution had been essential, that she trusted them. Nobody ever left the room feeling managed, which meant nobody ever left the room knowing they had been. The company thrived, genuinely. Record profits, expanded operations, a new philanthropic foundation in Kate's name that did real, measurable good in the world. Business magazines ran covers. The woman who saved Kruger Brent, a new kind of leadership, the Blackwell legacy reimagined. By every measurable standard, and this is the part I need you to sit with, Alexandra Templeton was the best thing that had ever happened to Kruger Brent Limited. The most effective leader in the company's history. Better than Jamie McGregor. Better than Kate. And here is the question that doesn't go away. The one that follows you out of this story and into whatever you do next. Does it matter how she got there? Does it matter what she is? What she really is? If the outcomes are this? If the foundation helps people? If the company thrives? If Peter Templeton, who never found out, lived a happy life? If Kate died feeling loved? Does it matter? I don't have an answer. I'm just the narrator. Jamie McGregor stood at the edge of a diamond field and saw everything he was going to take. Alexandra stands at a boardroom window and looks out at New York and sees the same thing. Same blood, same hunger, better manners. When she turns back to the table and places both hands flat on the mahogany surface, steady, unhurried, certain, it is Kate's gesture. Exact, inherited. She doesn't know she does it, or maybe she does. With Alexandra, you never quite know. There is one last scene. It happens years later, in a house in Maine, late at night, with a young man at a piano, who gets up and finds a door left slightly open and goes through it and finds something in the dark that was never meant to be found, and has to decide what to do with it, all on his own, in the quiet, with nobody watching. This is where the story ends, or doesn't, depending on who he is. Cedar Hill House at night, in winter, is a different place from the Cedar Hill House of birthday parties and chandeliers. The Atlantic pushes cold air through every gap. The rooms are full of the particular silence of houses that have held a lot of history and are still digesting it. Robert is 23. He did not go into the company. He chose the piano, or thought he did. He sits at the Steinway in the dark ballroom, the same one, the lit up, the strings visible inside like something anatomical, plays something quiet and unresolved. Not for an audience, not a performance. Just him and the instrument and a restlessness he hasn't put a name to yet. He stops, hands resting on the keys, looks up. Across the ballroom, a door, left slightly ajar. His great-grandmother's study, a room he has never been invited into. He is not looking for anything. He is just restless. The way you get restless in the houses of the dead, when the walls still feel like they're remembering things. The room is untouched. Decades of accumulated paper, the private record of a family, filed and stacked and mostly locked away. Mostly. His fingers trail across the shelves, and then a folder, unlabeled, tucked behind 3 others, like it slipped there, like it was meant to stay there, like someone put it exactly far enough back to ensure it would almost certainly never be found. He opens it. Letters. George Mellis's handwriting to an unknown third party, dated decades ago. He reads. The room is very quiet around him, just the sound of the paper, and the Atlantic out there in the dark, doing what it always does. He reads for a long time, and when he finishes, he sets the last letter down and sits very still. He thinks about Peter Templeton, who died 3 years ago, kind and devoted and entirely unaware, who had the happiest marriage of anyone Robert had ever known. He thinks about Kate, who built a century and handed it lovingly to exactly the wrong person. He thinks about Eve, who knew everything, said everything, proved nothing, and ended up with less than she started with. He thinks about Jamie McGregor in the South African dust, and the diamond, and the decision. He picks up the folder, and he places it back behind the other 3, exactly as he found it, exactly. He walks back through the dark house, sits at the Steinway, plays 1 note, lets it decay into the room, into the walls, into the silence. He never told anyone what he found. He was a Blackwell after all. The game continues. Jamie McGregor arrived in South Africa with nothing. Alexandra Templeton inherited everything. Neither of them broke a single law. One of them was called a thief. The other, a visionary. The difference was the smile and the patience, and knowing, always knowing, exactly which room to walk into, and when, and how. Master of the game. Always was, always will be.